welcome to episode 5 of Biologize. In this episode, we will explore natural partnering using inspiration from symbiosis in nature. In the vast majority of businesses, competent management teams grapple with the complexity of business. Current thinking suggests that future business survival will be determined by the quality of the partnerships both between and within organizations. Traditionally, strategy development has been based on industrial models and found favour in the 80s and 90s as core techniques on MBA programs teaching business leaders to understand, analyse and plan. These models, such as 5 forces, value chain, capabilities and resources, STEP, SWOT and the culture web, have a proven track record across a wide range of industries. However, as the business environment changes and we are facing an ever-increasing pace of change, we need something else. Could nature provide the answer? In this podcast, we will examine the field of business biomimetics and see how nature can be applied to the challenge of partnership development using nature's 3.8 billion years of R&D. We'll find a new mindset and examine a selection of biology-based frameworks to inspire natural partnering. Nature has long been a source of inspiration for business. The emerging field of biomimetics is an aspect of this fascination with the natural world. Engineers, product designers and architects have been exploring the possibilities of taking ideas from nature and applying them to complex problems for a long time. This biomimetic approach has created a number of well-known examples such as Velcro, Olympic medal-winning swimming costumes and the bionic car from Mercedes. All provide insight where the study and application of nature has helped. Some of the latest developments include submarines with flippers instead of propellers, new propulsion systems based on the jet effect of worms, and jumping robots for rough terrain are all examples of mimicry based on biological systems. More recently, work is also exploring the 3.8 billion years worth of R&D to see if it can help business strategy and process. This business biomimetic approach has already produced demonstrable results across a wide range of businesses. Biological systems are extracted into business models and frameworks, and these are then applied to strategic business challenges. The biological systems provide insight at the practical application level and in the process of strategic planning and development. Symbiotics is an example of a framework which provides insight and inspiration into the development, management, tension, and dissolution of strategic partnerships by observing how biological organisms relate to each other. Symbiosis is the biological term used to describe the relationship between two or more organisms. Generally, it is seen as a positive interaction where two species benefit from the relationship. This win-win relationship is called mutualism. However, symbiosis has a much broader meaning and spans from the positive interaction just described to the creation of hostile environments where nothing else survives. This is where antibiosis, where one organism produces a toxin that prevents or kills all other organisms. This is what Alexander Fleming observed in the penicillium mold, which later led to the development of penicillin. Adjustments of the chemical structure have allowed a wide range of antibiotics to be developed which can target specific bacteria and in doing so not harm the host. Other symbiotic examples include mistletoe growing in apple trees, pollination of plants by bees, fungus grown in termites' nests to provide food and a source of heating, which effectively creates air conditioning, clownfish and sea anemone, where the sea anemone provides protection for the clownfish, and algae growing inside flatworms, which provides a food source energy for the flatworms and the ability to remove the nitrates. The nitrates, on the other hand, provide a useful energy source for the algae. There are a range of options, therefore, between antibiosis and mutualism. Let us define them. Mutualism is where both organisms need and benefit from the relationship, so that's the classic win-win. Commensalism is where one organism uses another to gain advantage but doesn't harm the original organism. So that's either a win-neutral or a neutral-win, depending on which one of the partners in the relationship you are. Neutralism is where there's really no benefit to either organism. Parasitism is where the host is either eventually killed or damaged in some way. Competition is where both lose out in the end, so that's the classic lose-lose. And antibiosis is the extreme of that, where one organism creates a hostile environment for all organisms, so it's a very big win and a very big lose. The symbiotics model takes these principles of symbiosis and applies them to a business relationship. This can help us understand the relationship between two organisations and to understand which of those possible phases it is in. We can think of this as a matrix with the same axis of win to lose on both sides. One side representing one part of the relationship, i.e. one organisation, and the opposite side representing the other. We can now plot what we understand the existing relationship to be. The Symbiotic Matrix can be used to show the interrelationship between two business entities, and it can also be shown to represent a number of entities on the same matrix. So this way we can get a sense of where relationships are between organisations. This approach would typically be used to map a current relationship and then to define how the relationship should be. You can think about it as a simple 3x3 matrix. Whilst attempting to initially map current relationships, most people end up by putting relationships in the win-win box. But by drilling down further, it's possible to identify that quite a few of these are at best neutral, or are at worst parasitic, or in the absolute worst case, competitive, where neither side wins. What works well is to have both parties map the relationship themselves separately and then to come together to compare maps, and that can often reveal some interesting insight. It's particularly important, as in many cases, the individual organisations will hold a very different view of what the relationship currently looks like. This mapping approach, using the symbiotics model, works well for both internal relationships, internal to external relationships, and external to external. Once identified, any differences can be explored in a follow-on discussion and future actions agreed, if they want to agree future actions, to address the differences. Another use of the model is to focus on the mapping of the future relationships. Here again, the two organisations can visually represent their future view and start to quantify it in terms of the parameters based on nature. We'll discuss these in a moment. Once we have this picture and we understand what the future relationship is, we can start to think about where we are today, and we can start to look at how we might put in place what is needed to deliver a successful relationship. This is perhaps more useful than putting in a more traditional SLA with penalty clauses. So is the relationship one of partnership or one of parasitism? For example, mistletoe is a hemiparasite, and that whilst it creates its own carbohydrates via photosynthesis, it draws all other nutrients and water from the host plant. The relationship appears to work on one level in that the mistletoe does not draw on too many nutrients away from the host tree, which is usually an apple or a pear in the UK. However, it is still a parasite and eventually will result in the death of the tree if it continues to grow disproportionately to what the tree can provide. So here's an example where a relationship has some positive aspects which, depending on the viewpoint, may be defined differently, whether you're the tree or the mistletoe. The growth of the tree itself is also governed by the amount of nutrients taken by the mistletoe, and this could have an effect on the future potential of the tree, and the tree may itself not be achieving its potential to grow, to develop, to reproduce. There are other aspects to consider, such as the increasing weight of the mistletoe and the ability of the apple tree to hold and support that. As well as taking chemical nutrition, it could also cause physical damage. This multi-view of a relationship is also very applicable in the business context. What could be present as a positive, mutualistic partnership is possibly commensal or parasitic when examined in detail. To make sense of what we discover in the symbiotic matrix, we could look at the relationship context, and one way of determining the quality of a relationship is to use the Mrs. GREN framework. This framework has been developed using the biological principles of life, where Mrs. GREN is a mnemonic for the characteristics of what makes something alive. Let me run through these for you now. M is movement, R is respiration, S is sensitivity, G is growth, R is reproduction, E is excretion, and N is nutrition. So with those factors together in some form, we can clearly say that something would be alive. All the factors are needed, so you can't really live without one of those in place. Now there's some debate how that applies down at the micro level, where organisms such as a virus will use the host to provide some of that functionality. But if we just for now accept that you need those principles to be alive, we can perhaps start thinking about whether the relationship is alive. So once we have this mnemonic, we can use it to test the relationship and identify what might need work to address any gaps we've identified. So it builds on the symbiotic approach discussed earlier to create a richer understanding of the type of relationship and how alive it is. The Mrs. GREN framework can be used to understand the current situation, define the gaps, both what are observed and what people feel exist, and then to compare them to the planned business strategy. It's also a useful way of defining what the strategy could be. Recent experience in applying Mrs. GREN to an international business services company identified that there were two gaps in their respiration and nutrition in the partnership they had with a key customer. This led to an immediate change of business strategy and a significant improvement in the profitability of the relationship, but also a clearer understanding of the roles the two partners were playing and the types of behaviours that were either helping or being less helpful. So let's assume you've plotted a business relationship and you've identified that it is a lose-win, or perhaps even just commensal for you. In other words, the other organisation gets benefit, but you don't. If you'd originally set out to have a win-win relationship, then you can use Mrs. GREN to help you identify where the gaps might be. Let's take each factor in turn and just see how we could apply it to the relationship that you've identified. M is for movement. Are you putting enough effort into being with the partner? Are people in your organisation physically being present? R, under respiration, how much energy, or you can also think about this as cash, are you investing in the partnership? Sensitivity. What intelligence gathering mechanisms do you have in place? The ones you're going to use to measure the partnership performance. How well are you focused on the original benefits? How do you know what's drifting off course? Growth. How are you developing knowledge, networks, experience and know-how with the partner? Reproduction. What are you doing to spread your knowledge and experience? How are you using the partnership experience to help you create new partnerships? Excretion. What's getting in the way? What possibly redundant processes exist? What was there at the beginning that's no longer needed? What information flows should exist or did exist and now need to exist in a different way? What about the people involved? What about the structures you have? What could you excrete? And finally, nutrition. How are you supporting the partnership? What are you specifically going to do to make the partnership work? We will discuss the Mrs. GREN model in more detail in a future Biologize podcast. So what is the natural benefit? What is the benefit of thinking about using nature in this way? Well, nature is a key manager of resources, and recent work at the University of Bath has shown that when tackling problems of similar size and scale, nature has a very solution profile to the one that we as mankind might create. Of course, we are a part of nature, however, there seems to be a diversification in the way the rest of nature solves problems. Our primary resources used in problem solving tend to be energy, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with the quest for more people and more funding to get something solved. Similarly, the bigger or the more complex a problem is, the more energy we need to fix it. Nature, on the other hand, tends to make much more use of structure and information, so the energy footprint of a solution designed by nature, i.e. not mankind, is much lower than the man-made equivalent. This points to strategy development that is both sustainable and environmentally friendly. By applying this nature way of thinking, which I'm terming business biomimetics, in strategy development, could bring real business issues into direct cooperation with the corporate social responsibility statements and the need to be green. However, this naked strategy is simply not a bolt-on to the existing approach. It requires a conscious effort to accept a different way of thinking. The good news is that the concepts, frameworks and models are readily accessible and, if required, can be facilitated in depth by somebody qualified in biology. Recent experience in taking this approach with a wide range of businesses from the MOD in the UK through the brewing industry, fast-moving consumer goods and central government shows that the approach can be grasped and applied within an hour of starting. Our productive output that when implemented will make a tangible difference available only an hour later. Once educated on the approach, it's possible to work on strategic business issues the same day. By possibly appealing back to early teachings of biology, a cross-functional group can be readily access this basic way of working and this basic way of thinking. Strategy development is then based on the fundamentals of design that have their origins in 3.8 years of natural development. By taking a biologist approach to the observation of complex systems, it is possible to strip back a problem to its naked state. This strategy does not need 25 years of functional expertise to work, so it avoids groupthink and turf issues. By reaching back to childhood experiences of nature, it also fuels a high energy and enthusiastic behaviour from even the most hardened managers. There is more to discover. So are there a limit to the number of models that can be created with this approach? Well, to give you an example, there is an estimated 8 million species of beetles that have yet to be identified, and they must be a significant source of future ideas. And if we scale that to the other things that we're learning pretty much every day, there is almost an endless source of possibility. To pull all of these aspects together, I have developed the Infinity Consulting Process Model. And what that does is it integrates complex biological systems with complex business problems and allows a translation between the two. The Infinity model means starting either with a complex business problem and finding the inspiration of biological systems, or observing a complex biological system and looking for ideas to improve business performance. Nature then provides a renewable source of information-rich ideas. To conclude this podcast, I'd like to return to the earlier discussion on the application of biomimetics to business partnerships and the ability to identify both the type of partnership, the life strength of the partnership, and finally to decide the naked strategy for that business. This approach, inspired by nature and underpinned by research, is readily accessible to cross-functional management teams that are tackling complex business issues. The partnership between business and biology is facilitated by the Infinity Consulting Process Model. And today we've explored the Symbiotic Matrix and the Mrs. GREN quality of life approach to identifying the context for that symbiotics relationship. Symbiotics provides a useful way in which to examine the relationship both internally and externally, and then to determine whether they fit with the current strategy. By taking this non-confrontational approach, it's possible to engage a wide range of expertise in the discussion without challenging established functional, market, or brand-based opinion and expertise. Biology brings an holistic approach to strategic thinking, and simple tools such as Mrs. GREN provide innovative new diagnostic capability to the existing portfolio of strategy development. Because the approach is based on 3.8 billion years of R&D, the business biomimetic approach builds on proven expertise. And whilst there may be those that contrast the speed of business with the time for evolution, one only needs to look at the morphology of viruses, the range of dog breeds, and the variety of pigeon subspecies to see it's possible to drive evolution in a very short period of time. By observing natural approaches, it lends itself to an innovative way of tackling the complexity of partnership management. And what makes this the most interesting of all is it's possible to build a strategy and implement an approach in an afternoon using lessons from nature.